Each of us has our own ideas and opinions. Sometimes we agree with each other, and sometimes we don't. I bet you can remember an occasion in which two of your friends had a major disagreement, and you had to be a peacekeeping, neutral third party. Oftentimes, a neutral third party can help two friends resolve their differences. On a global scale, that's the idea behind the United Nations, a global peacekeeping organization. Let's take a look at how the UN was established and how it carries out its mission to support peace and provide humanitarian aid throughout the world. How was the United Nations established? Towards the end of World War II, U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Prime Minister of Great Britain Winston Churchill, and the leader of the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin, met in Yalta, a city in Crimea, Ukraine. These leaders had a shared goal of achieving worldwide peace and stability. They drew up plans for a group of representatives from many different countries to come together and discuss possible solutions to problems that threatened peace around the world. This group was to replace a similar group, the League of Nations, which was established after World War I. It was President Roosevelt who suggested that the new group be called the United Nations. The next step was a meeting called the United Nations Conference on International Organization. This was a gathering of representatives from 50 countries that took place in San Francisco from April until June of 1945. The goal of the group was to write the charter for the United Nations. A charter is the official document that establishes rights and duties of a group. Sadly, President Roosevelt died just 2.5 months before the signing of the charter on June 26, 1945. As a tribute to him, the name United Nations was officially adopted by the group. The United Nations Charter took effect on October 24, 1945, after it was signed by the 5 permanent members of the Security Council: United States, Great Britain, France, Soviet Union, and China, and a majority of the 46 other member countries. Let's review what we have learned about the establishment of the United Nations. Question 1. Which of the following former world leaders met in 1945 to draw up plans for the organization that became the United Nations? A. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. B. Joseph Stalin. C. Winston Churchill. D. All of the above. The correct answer is D. All of these leaders met to draw up plans for the United Nations. Question 2. In what year did the United Nations Charter take effect? A. 1945. B. 1952. C. 1988. D. 2001. If you answered A, you know that the United Nations Charter took effect in 1945. Question 3. The UN Security Council has how many permanent members? A. 3. B. 4. C. 5. D. 10. The correct answer is C. The UN Security Council has 5 permanent members. How does the United Nations work? The Charter outlines the goals and guiding principles of the United Nations. Maintaining international peace and security was one of the most important goals of the new organization. The Charter also established the procedures for how this new international organization would run. Today, the United Nations has 193 member countries. It is a global organization of sovereign or independent countries. Each country has agreed to voluntarily join the organization. Notably, the Vatican is not currently a member of the United Nations. The Vatican, or Holy See as it is called, was granted permanent observer status at the United Nations in 1964. In 2012, Palestine was also granted permanent observer status as a non-member state, which was an upgrade from their previous non-member entity status. As permanent observers, the Holy See and Palestine are allowed to participate in the General Assembly. UN members meet every September through December at its headquarters in New York City. Representatives from the United Nations member countries are divided into different committees. Each committee focuses on different types of problems or issues that people throughout the world are facing. The General Assembly, the Security Council, and the Commission on Human Rights are just a few of the UN's committees. During committee meetings, representatives have the opportunity to discuss issues, problems, and ideas, and present their country's concerns and perspectives. The United Nations Charter also calls for each member nation to have a seat in the General Assembly. The members of the General Assembly would then vote on members to other committees. The General Assembly is the largest part of the United Nations. During the opening session each September, any member nation may take the floor of the General Assembly and speak about whatever issue he or she wishes. The Secretary General of the UN is considered its top official and is the official spokesperson for the organization. The UN Security Council makes a recommendation to the General Assembly about who would best fill the role. The General Assembly then votes and appoints a Secretary General for a 5-year term. The current Secretary General of the UN is the former Prime Minister of Portugal, Antonio Guterres, who took office on January 1st, 2017. Let's review what we have just learned about how the United Nations operates. Question 1. The United Nations currently has how many member countries? A. 100. B. 193. C. 275. D. 550. The correct answer is B. The UN has 193 member countries. Question 2. The headquarters for the United Nations is located in which city? A. Geneva. B. Moscow. C. Stockholm. D. New York City. If you answered D, you know that the headquarters for the UN is in New York City. Question 3. What 2 countries have permanent observer status at the United Nations? A. Great Britain and Ireland. B. Ukraine and Bulgaria. C. The Vatican and Palestine. D. Syria and Iraq. The correct answer is C. The Vatican and Palestine have permanent observer status at the United Nations. How does the United Nations operate in the world today? Although the General Assembly is the biggest group at the United Nations, the most powerful committee is the Security Council. When tensions and conflicts arise around the world, this group of members is primarily responsible for maintaining international peace and security. The Security Council is made up of the 5 permanent members: China, France, Russian Federation, United Kingdom, and the United States, and 10 non-permanent members who are elected by the General Assembly for 2-year terms. All of the permanent members must agree on any Security Council resolution or decision. If even one disagrees and votes against or vetoes a resolution, it does not take effect. The main role of the Security Council is to determine if an act of aggression or a threat to peace exists and to recommend a settlement to the issue. The UN Charter gives the Security Council several options for helping to bring peace to a region. The Security Council can send UN peacekeeping troops and humanitarian aid into a region, as well as impose economic punishments called sanctions for countries who act inappropriately. And the Security Council can force weapons inspections. Peacekeeping is one of the United Nations' major goals. You might be wondering how the United Nations helps to keep peace in war-torn areas. If the Security Council passes a resolution to send peacekeeping troops to an area, the UN creates a multinational military force comprised of military troops from member nations. This multinational force is under the command of the United Nations and is a neutral third party in the situation. They help to negotiate ceasefires and buffer zones between the warring groups. United Nations peacekeepers provide a wide range of services for people in war zones. They help communities set up and run elections and provide humanitarian services to the local people. Sometimes UN forces provide training for police forces in the area. Military forces under the UN command have also faced the dangerous job of clearing landmines. The UN military forces usually carry only light weapons that are to be used only in self-defense. Members of the UN military force might work with the opposing groups to mediate a solution to the crisis. Sometimes, the United Nations is sent to an area on an observer mission. For these missions, the UN forces are not armed and are there to ensure that agreements between the two parties are being followed. The ultimate goal of the United Nations peacekeepers is to help an area transition from violence and crisis to peace. There are currently 16 United Nations peacekeeping missions throughout the world. Peacekeeping forces can be found in places like Haiti, Kosovo, Darfur, India, and Pakistan. The members of the United Nations are also focused on making the world a better place for children. Have you ever heard of UNICEF? That is the United Nations Children's Fund. UNICEF works to bring food, water, and medical supplies to children who are affected by natural disasters like floods and earthquakes. The United Nations also offers humanitarian aid for many different types of crises that arise around the globe. United Nations teams provide emergency shelter and other services, like coordinating healthcare and education for refugees and other displaced people throughout the world. Teams from the UN also provide humanitarian assistance in dealing with health crises, like the HIV epidemic, and work on challenging issues like climate change and ending world hunger. If you are watching a news story about a war-torn area, you will be able to recognize United Nations peacekeepers. Members of the UN peacekeeping team wear the United Nations insignia on their uniforms and wear blue berets, or blue helmets if the area is dangerous, that are easy to spot. Let's review what we have learned about the types of work that the United Nations does in today's world. Question 1. Which of the committees in the United Nations is thought to be the most powerful? A. General Assembly. B. International Court of Justice. C. Security Council. D. Economic and Social Council. The correct answer is C. The Security Council is thought to be the most powerful of the UN committees. Question 2. How might UN peacekeeping forces provide aid to a war-torn area? A. Set up elections. B. Clear landmines. C. Work with opposing sides to mediate solutions. D. All of the above. The correct answer is D. UN peacekeepers could provide all of those types of aid. Question 3. What color berets or helmets are worn by UN peacekeepers? A. Red. B. Yellow. C. Blue. D. White. If you answered C, you know that UN peacekeepers are known by their blue berets and helmets. What is the Model UN? Do you think you have what it takes to step into the shoes of an ambassador to the United Nations? Well, you might have an opportunity to find out. More than 400,000 middle, high school, and college students take part in a United Nations simulation each year. This simulation is called Model UN, or MUN. Model UN is a simulation of the real work of the United Nations General Assembly. Many schools offer Model United Nations as a club. The club's goal is to help students prepare for their experiences at whichever Model UN conference they choose to attend. In most cases, students from a school will travel to regional conferences to participate in the simulation. At the conference, students are assigned countries to represent. Students will represent their countries at the General Assembly and in any committees of which their countries are members. They will then research their assigned country's perspectives about current issues and problems. Those perspectives are shared with the Model UN General Assembly and in other committees. In order to accurately represent their country's perspectives, students have to research topics like the country's history, current economic status, geography, and trade status. Model UN allows students to gain experience in leadership, negotiating, public speaking, and research. Model United Nations proceedings are formal, just like the procedures followed by the actual United Nations. So students also gain experience and develop skills like diplomacy, and even how to dress as a professional. The goal of a Model UN committee is to work together to pass a resolution to address the specific problems that were discussed. Oftentimes, the problems that students at Model UN face are the very same problems that the actual delegates to the United Nations must face. Recent Model UN conferences have dealt with wide-ranging topics like global nuclear disarmament, combating illegal trade in wildlife, and preventing violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. At the end of a Model UN conference, awards are usually given to outstanding participants. Let's review what we have learned about Model UN. Question 1. About how many students take part in Model UN each year? A. 10,000. B. 150,000. C. 250,000. D. 400,000. If you answered D, you know that about 400,000 students take part each year. Question 2. Model UN allows students to gain experience with which of the following skills? A. Research. B. Leadership. C. Public speaking. D. All of the above. The correct answer is D. Model UN students gain experience with all of these skills. Question 3. What is the goal of a Model UN committee? A. To work together to get their resolution passed. B. To make a presentation to another committee. C. To get the actual UN to consider their ideas. D. None of the above. The correct answer is A. The goal of a Model UN committee is to work together to get their resolution passed. Thinking question. What world events do you think students at this year's Model UN should discuss? Why?